So let's go for a ride and talk about Indian and Harleys and motorcycles in general. What do you say? I got steel-toed boots on, and it's hard to get my big fat boot underneath this shifter peg, so if you heard it going into second gear a little harshly there, it's not the motorcycle, it's my clumsiness. But I've been thinking that somebody probably wonders why I chose the Challenger versus the Harley. And it's a good question. So, what kind of person buys an Indian versus buying the Harley? Harley still sells about, I don't know, 250,000 motorcycles a year, maybe more. And Indian / Polaris never really releases sales figures. But I can tell you, it's far less than what Harley sells a year. I'd be surprised if they sold half of what Harley sells a year. So, there's way more options when it comes to buying a Harley. There's way more dealer options when it comes to buying your Harley. I mean, if I leave my house to go to an Indian dealership, I gotta go to 2 places really that are feasible for me to purchase. It's not like I have a litany of choices to buy an Indian. It's one of 2. Man, those taps do sound good. Yeah. One of the Indian dealerships is about a half hour, 35-minute drive. And the one that I prefer is over an hour. In an hour's drive in any direction, I could be at least 3 different Harley dealerships, and that's just in one direction. So there are a ton more choices when it comes to buying a Harley. There's way more choices with models, dealers, jackets, t-shirts, hats, you name it. I mean, to buy into the Harley, you're buying not into just a motorcycle, you're buying into the brand. You're buying into the culture, the lifestyle, so to speak. It's not like you're just buying a machine and hoping for the best. You're being kind of baptized into the family. And that's tempting to me. I mean, for a matter of months or even over the years off and on, I would always switch the thought in my head from Harley to brand X. And for the longest time, that brand X was Victory. I still own the Victory Kingpin. They too, if you don't know, they were owned by Polaris. Polaris never built the Victory, and they never built a Indian. Polaris themselves never designed any of the motorcycle that they owned. They hired an independent team to do so. They built an independent factory in Spirit Lake, Iowa to be their motorcycle factory. So it's not like we're taking Polaris ATVs and snowmobiles and slingshots and whatever else they still make to build motorcycles. They hired and developed an independent segment to expand their business. What they don't really do as well as Harley is the whole culture thing. They are trying to get there with Indian, I think. They have the whole Indian Motorcycle Riders Group thing. It's supposed to rival the Harley Owners Group, and it's small, but it is a dealership sponsored thing, and you'll find them at dealerships across the country. There's just far, far less of them than what Harley has to offer. So why did I choose the Indian? Well, this particular bike I bought because I got the right deal on it. it wasn't like I loved the Indian more than I love the Harley. There are things about the Indian that I like more than Harley, and I think I talked about it in a previous video. That is, the suspension is just top notch right off the showroom floor. Had I found my Road Glide Special or Road Glide ST and bought it instead, to get anywhere near this suspension level on this Challenger, I would have to spend a minimum of $1,000 on a good set of rear shocks and an equal amount of money for drop-in cartridges in the front forks on the Harley. And even then, the rear shocks that I just dumped $1,000 on aren't going to have 4.5 inches of travel like this one does, and the front fork cartridges are still going to be conventional. They're not going to be inverted like they are on this one. The suspension on this bike is literally the best in the business. There's nothing in the V-twin bagger class that will even rival, even stand against the suspension on this motorcycle. So that is better than the Harley. Did it make me buy this bike versus buying a Harley? No. I would have bought the Harley. I can't stress that enough. I'd have bought the Harley had I found the deal that I was looking for. This bike produces more horsepower and torque than any Harley bagger on the market. Hands down, even the Screaming Eagle CVO 117, it doesn't make more horsepower or torque than this engine does. To the tire, it may make a few more foot-pounds, but that's going to be dependent on the conditions in the dyno room that they check it on. So we could be plus or minus 10% on one dyno to another, and while we're comparing them. So to say that one makes more torque or less torque than the other isn't really fair. What is fair and what is known is that this motorcycle makes significantly more horsepower than any Harley bagger on the market. Anything. The only thing that Harley produces that's even close to what this bike makes is the new Revolution Max that comes in the Pan America and I think the Nightster. So there's two things that would make a person buy this bike over the Harley rival, and that would be suspension and performance with the motor. Everything else is really just subjective. Most people, and I say most, I say the majority of people who are in the market for a motorcycle like this are going to buy the Harley just because of the name and the dealership convenience and the longevity in the business that Harley has been around the longest. Plus, in some ways, I kind of think the Road Glide does look better than this bike. Don't get me wrong, I love to sit and look at my motorcycle. I think it's a really, really good looking bagger. But if I had to choose which one was just a better looking bike, the Road Glide has a slightly better look than the Challenger. And let's cut the crap and admit it, that this bike was built to directly rival the Harley-Davidson Road Glide. There ain't no, you can't bullshit a bullshitter, what my dad would say. Like, I can't lie to you, you can't lie to me without us knowing that we're lying to each other and saying that this isn't built to copy. It is. When Indian came out with their first bagger back in 2014 with the Chieftain, it didn't sell that well. There was a small sect of bagger buyers and Indian riders who went out and bought those early model Chieftains with the streamliner design fairing and the rounded saddlebags. But when they changed that design, I believe in 2019, they made it look like a street glide. Why did they do that? Well, because the market was saying, wow, it could be so much better, it just doesn't really look like what I would want to buy. It doesn't look like a street glide. Man, I wish it looked more like a street glide. That's what most people were saying, so they ran off and bought the street glide. So in order to try to call the market, Indian designers went back to work and redesigned the fairing and redesigned the saddlebags. And you park a street glide and a Chieftain right beside each other, and there's no denying that the street glide and the Chieftain look very, very similar. And the same can be said for the Road Glide and my Challenger. You park my buddy's Road Glide right next to my Challenger, they are going to look strikingly similar. They could be brothers or first cousins, if that was possible. So I bought a bike that looked real similar to the Road Glide that I was planning on, or at least thought I would buy, because I love the way it looks. And I wanted a fixed fairing. So I bought the closest thing that I could get to it. This one does have the nifty electric windshield that I never use, because the only time I would ever want to use this is if I was crawling at, 20 mile an hour or less and needed a little more air when it's really hot out. But it doesn't really change airflow that much, in my opinion, at that speed. And when I'm at highway speeds, if I ride with it at this level, the lower level, it buffers my head a little bit more than I like. So to keep it down like this, even though it looks cooler, it doesn't work as effectively. So I just keep it up, and it's perfect. But the power adjustable windshield would not make me buy this Indian. It was just an added function. It's kind of neat. I do love the infotainment system here. The one thing that this bike doesn't have, because it's a base, is the navigation. It doesn't have Apple CarPlay. I can't, Bluetooth my CarPlay to this screen. Will I add it? Maybe. I don't know. It's a $550 upgrade that I don't really know if it's worth $550. So could it be in next spring or summer I got some extra money, then I changed my mind about and add the CarPlay flash to this? Maybe, but I kind of doubt it. I mean, it's $550 that would go a long ways to riding somewhere, taking a weekend journey, or accessorizing the bike in a way that is more functional or more aesthetically pleasing to me than just being able to use CarPlay. I can just turn my phone on and look at it right there, just as simple as I can looking at that screen. So as nice as the infotainment system is now, I think I'll just stick with it. Ergonomics, that's probably the biggest difference between these two bikes, between the Road Glide and the Challenger. I really do believe that this motorcycle is more comfortable if you're 6 foot tall or taller. If you're under 6 foot, the Road Glide will be perfectly fine for you, ergonomically speaking. Once you get over the 6 foot threshold, this bike just has a little bit more to offer. The wheelbase is a hair longer. The seat, the floorboard to handlebar triangle is just a little bit bigger, especially if you roll the bars up an inch or so like I did. It just makes it a little more tailor-made to a guy who's my size or in the neighborhood. So way more comfortable on this motorcycle than I would be on any Harley. So that's a really big key thing there for me. So there's a handful of things there that a person would want to think about before they made the decision to buy one or the other. I don't think any of them are groundbreaking, because even with ergonomics, I could have bought a Road Glide and put floorboard extensions on them and a seat that pushes me back an inch or two and change the handlebars and have perfect ergonomics on it as well. I would not have anything lost by going that route other than spending more money. This bike was $23,900 plus tax and blah blah blah. So to go buy the equivalent Road Glide, even a used one, in the market that I'm surrounded by here in northern Ohio, I would have ended up having to buy a Harley that was 5 years old or older with 8,000 to 10,000 miles or more on it for the same price. And then on top of that, I'd still have to put another 5,000 to 10,000 in it to make it as comfortable and as good performing as this bike is. And that's without doing a stage 2. I'd have had to put, well, a minimum of 5,000 for suspension and another 5,000 for a good cam, exhaust, intake, and tune to make it where this bike came at from the dealership. So, I mean, money-wise, if you're looking for performance per dollar, this is still just going to be the bike to buy. There's not a bagger really on the market that's going to give you more for your dollar than this. Someone may say, what about the Goldwing? What about it? It's not the same as this bike. It is not the same as this bike. It has a horizontally opposed 6-cylinder engine in it. It does not give you the feel of a V-twin, of an American V-twin. It doesn't give you the sound of an American V-twin or the look. Is it a cool, great performing motorcycle? Absolutely. It just isn't going to give you what I got with this Indian Challenger or a Harley Road Glide. You're going to have to make that sacrifice in order to be satisfied with riding a Goldwing. If that's what you want, then you'll have a bagger that is probably as fast or a little faster than this, that rides and handles very similar to this, that gives you the electronically adjustable windscreen that this has, and a big infotainment screen here. So the Goldwing is close in options and functions and features, but it don't give you the American muscle, sound, and look and feel. It just doesn't. Kawasaki Vaquero, not even close to this bike. It is a lot cheaper than this bike. So, you know, pick your poison. Do you want to spend $5,000 or so less and get a bike that's A, non-American, B, doesn't have near the power that this bike has, and there's 10. It doesn't have the rider handling that this has, and it doesn't have the adjustable windscreen that this has. It has hard bags that open up like clamshells and all your stuff falls out if it's not secured just right. I mean, there's tons of stuff that the Kawasaki doesn't have and doesn't do and can't offer that this bike does for a lot more money. So with this bike, why I chose the Indian is I do believe in the build quality of these things. You may have a Challenger or owned a Challenger where you had some electronic issues with it. I get it, especially in the 2020 model year line. Any first year model year line of anything is going to be experimental. So if you're brave enough to go that route and buy the first year in the model line, more than likely you're going to be the test pilot for those things. Also, I believe that with the electronic glitches in the Challenger, the majority of those come with the Dark Horse and Limited and Elite models that have even more than what this base model does. There are several features that my bike don't have, including the Apple CarPlay flash. It doesn't have the lean sensors, I forget what it's even called, and it doesn't have remote locking bags. So there's a bunch of electronics that are stripped from this bike, and if I don't have those electronic features, they're not going to fail on me. So as far as this bike being quality, I believe in the build quality of the engine, the transmission, the clutch. I do believe, you know, the body on this thing, the fairing, the gas tank, the bags are solid. I heard people complain and say that the bags are a little bit flimsy compared to a Harley. Maybe. But I'd sooner have a flimsier saddlebag than a flimsier crankshaft like a Harley does. Just a fact. I've been saying it for years. Harleys put very flimsy, weak crankshafts in their motorcycles. Now, the newer ones I'm hearing and reading maybe a little bit better, but it's still a weak point in that engine, the crankshaft. Probably the most vital part of the engine is the weakest part. So I'll take a strong forged crankshaft over a cast iron high run out crankshaft any day. Give me a flimsy saddlebag and a strong crankshaft, and you could have your strong saddlebags and flimsy crankshaft. The number one argument for me not to buy Harley would be their overall build quality when it comes to internal engine parts. Everything else they do is basically world class. I also like technology. I think that for the price, I get LED lights all around. Things that on a Harley are still incandescent turn signals and whatnot. It just looks chintzy. And some of the Oil pump issues, still a concern. Yeah, I know they did upgrade it, but it took them 2 or 3 model years to get it right. Something you will not find on an Indian motorcycle is mechanical issues where you have to potentially lose your engine to get them to rebuild it. So there's several issues right there that would push me towards buying an Indian. And I like the fact that Indian came out with a ground up brand new design engine. It took them a lot of money and a lot of time and a lot of investment to make this bike with something that the world's never had before. This isn't a copycat design. This isn't something that, you know, they took a competitor's engine and altered it and put it in a bike. This is something that they built from the ground up, and I think it's phenomenal that they did that. I absolutely love that Indian spent the money and the time to give the market something groundbreaking. So kudos to them. I support that kind of thing. It's American ingenuity, it's American engineering at its finest, and it's awesome. So between performance of the engine, world-class suspension, ergonomics, ingenuity, and groundbreaking product as far as the engine goes, that's what I bought an Indian for. I don't really care what name's on the tank. Matter of fact, if Indian got canceled tomorrow, which I hate cancel culture, but if it got canceled tomorrow, I would be giddy to call them Victory again. That's, in my opinion, that's what this is. I was a Victory lover. I love those bikes. I still own one. I've had 2 of them, and I think they were just really, really great bikes. Something that the market needed to give an alternative to Harley, and that's what they were. And that's where this came from. Whether this would have been the new Victory is up for debate. I don't care if it would have been or it wouldn't have been. All I know is it's the new Indian, and it runs like a scalded hog, and I love it. And I love that it's something a little different than the mainstream. So as much as I respect Harley for being the elephant in the room, they are the market. They make a great bike with some pretty significant flaws, but overall I still think they make a great bike. I still think that choosing this bike was exactly what I needed to do, even though I didn't know it before I bought it. And if you're on the line or if you're on the fence and maybe you're considering buying an Indian, of course I'm going to recommend them. Start out small if you want. Get a Chief, get a Scout, get an FTR. I've ridden them all. They are phenomenal machines. The new Chief Dark Horse with the 116 in it is a world-class cruiser. Their next level of performance and ride and look compared to my 12-year-old Victory. When they first came out, I was disgusted with Indian because they made a steel frame cruiser that looked like an old bike with an inferior engine. I always considered the Thunderstroke to be inferior to the Victory, but I'll admit that I was wrong because I test drove one a couple times, and I'll tell you that 116 and that lightweight little cruiser is an absolute beast. Them things just get it. At the same time, the 116 Thunderstroke in the Chieftain will rival this bike all day long. It may not have quite as much top end, but with 120 plus foot-pounds of torque at virtually any RPM, it's kind of hard to say that this bike will just flat out outrun it. I'm sure in the right circumstance with the right riders, this bike would outrun it, but it wouldn't be till you were up at, you know, 50 miles an hour, 60 miles an hour or so, and winding the RPMs up towards the top of the scale. This bike would take over at that point, but I'll tell you, the 116 in that Chieftain is no joke. And they got the same or very, very similar frames on them. They got similar suspension. This bike does have, again, and I'm going to keep saying this word, does have the inverted front end, which I prefer. This bike does have a Fox rear shock on it, where the Chieftain has a, I believe it's Fox. If it's not Fox, it's an air shock on it. It's a pneumatic adjustable shock. I couldn't tell the difference in the ride quality on it. I've ridden both of the bikes, and the Chieftain with the air shock rides every bit as good as this. I didn't get a chance to really push the Chieftain in the corners to see if it handles as good as this, but to me, just on a 10-mile test drive, what this bike does clearly better is wind management and ergonomics. Have a little bit more room on this bike than you do on Chieftain. Not really sure why, but I think it's just the handlebar location on this bike. But for somebody 6 foot or taller, you do have a little bit more room on it. So, why did I buy the Indian? That's what I've been trying to talk about. And I guess it's just because I enjoy the product. I respect that they come out with product that's a little more cutting edge than what Harley does. I personally believe, had not Victory and then Indy and beyond the market, Harley would still be making 65 horsepower 96 cubic inch V-twins, and maybe even 88. When Victory came out with the 100 cubic inch, that kind of propelled Harley to make the 96. When Victory came out with the 106, it kind of propelled Harley to make the 103. And then by that point, it was, you know, Harley had kind of advanced and moved up the chain with their product and made something a lot more competitive than what they had been making for many years. So competition in the market definitely produced a much better Harley. And that's another reason why I support Indian. I think because of that, we have way better choices as consumers in the market. So I'll support the quote-unquote underdog or the little guy, even though they're financially backed by Polaris at a $50 billion company or something outrageous like that. The Indian brand and the name isn't nearly as well known or maybe as popular as Harley, and I'm kind of down with that. I'll support the little guy. And I'm at work, so check back another day or so. Maybe I'll have another video posted for everybody, for the 2 or 3 of you that watch my videos. Have a great day.